Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, The Good, the Bad, and Philosophy. In this video we're going to be looking at what is virtue ethics. So, as the sole principal archaic theory of normative ethics, virtue ethics offers an explanation of what makes someone a good or bad person. An explanation of good and bad action is then built on top of those definitions. Someone's actions are good or bad because they're acting like a virtuous person would, instead of the consequentialist or deontological project, which does the opposite. It defines the actions which are good and bad first, and builds on top of those any ideas of virtue that you would have. Virtue ethics is the third main alternative to deontology and consequentialism. Instead of defining either good consequences or rules that you need to follow, the virtue ethicist will define virtues, and what exactly it means to possess a certain virtue. Virtues might be stated explicitly, or determined maybe as a midpoint between two vices. Courage is balancing brashness and cowardice, etc. An ability to avoid a virtue going too far, say being hurtfully honest, is often referred to as practical wisdom, and it's a requirement of fully possessing a virtue. Many virtue ethicists will also claim that being virtuous means both actually acting in accordance with that virtue and being in the correct mental state, acting for the sake of that virtue, not because it satisfied some other desire. And it's not in only one context that one must act to end up possessing a virtue. You must act consistently in accordance with that virtue. You can't just do one good thing one time. Virtue ethics can be traced back to the likes of Plato, Confucius, Mencius, and especially Aristotle. It has seen a resurgence beginning in the second half of the 20th century and continuing into the present day. In the following videos, we're going to look at how virtue can be defined, and different ways virtue can be used to build out an ethical theory. But simply for this video, deontology, right and wrong action, is primary. It's impermissible to commit sexual assault because it is against the rules of morality. Deontology is about following rules. The right or the wrong action is central to it. Consequentialism is going to be based on good and bad consequences. So good or bad consequences are primary. Sexual assault brings about a bad state of affairs, therefore it's wrong. However, virtue ethics is going to have its primary, its key piece be virtue and vice. So sexual assault conflicts with some virtue, therefore sexual assault is not something that a virtuous person would do. Therefore, it is wrong. It takes a couple more steps to build out to that right or wrong action with virtue ethics, because we have to start with the idea of someone being virtuous or not, and then build to that action. If we wanted to talk about in deontology or consequentialism what it means for someone to be virtuous, we would have to start with, well, this person follows the rules consistently, and therefore they have this virtue, or follows this rule consistently, and therefore they have this virtue. And this rule is this way because of that. Or in consequentialism, you might build it out to this person consistently maximizes a good state of affairs for these types of people, and therefore they have a particular virtue. But it becomes a lot more difficult to understand those virtues in the sense of deontology and consequentialism than it is for virtue ethics. But it does mean that virtue ethics takes a little bit longer to build out to what is actually right or wrong action. That was what is virtue ethics. In this part of the series, which is the third and final chunk, we're going to be looking at virtue, agent-centered virtue ethics, as well as target-centered virtue ethics. And once we are done with all of that, we're going to be moving on to the second half of this series, which I think is going to be really cool, where we're going to look at modern ethical dilemmas and how these three main normative theories of ethics would tackle them. Watch this video and more here at Carneades.org. Stay tuned next week for a live free giveaway. And stay skeptical, everybody.